Shoes, written and illustrated by Susan DeBell, Ph.D. Miranda Peabody was 6 years old and very smart. She could spell her name backwards and forwards. MirandaAdnarim. She could whistle many catchy tunes. She could even stand on one foot, chew sugarless gum, and twirl her short brown hair all at the same time. She had a mom who was a high school health teacher and a dad who worked in a very large office building. They both thought Miranda was the best and told her so quite often. "You're the best!" Yes, Miranda was a very smart and talented person, but she had one problem. She couldn't understand any of the students in her class, and she had no patience with them. In fact, she often got very angry with her classmates and made fun of them. She even called them names. So every day at school, Miranda would remark to her teacher, Miss Clump, that she just couldn't understand anyone in her class and asked her teacher why the other students weren't as smart and talented as she. "I don't understand." She couldn't understand why Thomas Kolpowski couldn't sing the school song on key. Miranda called him crackle voice right to his face. She couldn't understand why Arlene Lee couldn't draw straight lines. Miranda told Arlene that her pictures were the worst ones she had ever seen. And she couldn't understand why Brian Peters couldn't even finish his homework on time. Miranda told him he was slow and that he better speed up if he wanted to be successful in school. In fact, she couldn't even understand why her teacher, Miss Clemp, would constantly tell her that she should stop losing her temper, making people feel sad, and calling them names. Miss Clemp suggested that Miranda try to understand other people by standing in their shoes. Miranda wondered what standing in someone else's shoes meant, so she decided to ask her best friend, Patricia Greentree, if she knew. She didn't know what this meant either, and neither did Mrs. Dalrymple, Miranda's favorite doll, who just looked at Miranda and smiled. When she asked her mother about standing in someone else's shoes, her mother began to explain the importance of wearing properly fitted shoes. When she asked her father, he began reading the latest History of Selling Shoes annual report. Miranda got nowhere and began to wonder if she would ever learn how to stand in someone else's shoes. Finally, she decided to experiment. She collected all of the shoes she could carry from the closets in her house and piled them carefully on the floor of her room. She then sorted them into pairs and began to stand in each one. She stood in her dad's shiny leather slippers, but they were so big that she almost fell flat on her face. She then stood in her mother's platform summer sandals, but they were so high that Miranda could hardly see the floor. When she tried to stand in her baby shoes, they would only fit on the tops of her toes. Miranda tried on each pair in her carefully sorted pile, but none of them fit comfortably. Then Miranda decided to go next door and ask her neighbor, Mrs. Fishpond, how she could stand in someone else's shoes. Mrs. Fishpond was very kind and very wise and often gave Miranda very good advice. Mrs. Fishpond, Miranda asked, how can I stand in someone else's shoes? Very carefully, Mrs. Fishpond answered. But I did, said Miranda. I tried on every pair of shoes I could find in my house and none would fit. Mrs. Fishpond smiled. To really stand in someone else's shoes, you must put yourself in that person's place. You must show them empathy. Empathy? Thought Miranda. Now there's something else that I don't understand. To show empathy, Mrs. Fishpond continued, you must either think of a time you felt the same way as another person, or you must pretend to be the person you are trying to understand. So Miranda closed her eyes and remembered a time when she lost her front teeth and couldn't whistle for several weeks. Then she imagined herself standing in Thomas Kopowski's new green sneakers with a big white star on the side, trying to sing the school song while everyone else moaned and held their ears. How embarrassed he must have felt, thought Miranda. Then she remembered a time in art class when she couldn't draw a face, no matter how hard she tried. Then she tried to imagine herself standing in Arlene Lee's fancy pink tennis shoes, trying to draw enough straight lines to make a house. How frustrated and sad Arlene must have felt, Miranda thought. Then she thought of a time she was trying to understand her spelling homework while her father practiced his favorite song, Home on the Range, over and over again on the saxophone. She then imagined herself standing in Brian Peters' black boots, trying to finish his homework while his babysitter's two young sons ran around the house screaming for another ice cream cone. How sad and embarrassed he must have felt when he had no homework to turn in the next day. Miranda even imagined herself standing in Miss Clump's high-heeled loafers, and how frustrated it must be to hear Miranda's name-calling and complaints about the other students. When she had imagined herself in the place of everyone in her class, Miranda thanked Mrs. Fishpond for her help and ran home to tell her parents what she learned about empathy. Both of her parents hugged Miranda and told her she really was the best shoe stander in all of Mountain Stream Elementary School, that is. When Miranda arrived at school the next day, she looked around at all of her classmates and remembered what it was like to stand in their shoes. In fact, the more shoe standing she imagined, the more she finally understood what it meant to have empathy and how important it was to understand other people and be kind to them. Having empathy was an important tool that Miranda knew she needed to use every day, everywhere she went, and with everyone she met. That night, Miranda had a wonderful dream. She dreamed that she was standing in the shoes of everyone in the whole world, and she had empathy for them all. The end.